Suppose you have a large language model that only fits across several expensive GPUs. Wouldn't it be nice to run that same model on just one card, without retraining anything and without noticeably hurting quality? That is exactly the promise of Gptq, a post-training quantization method from Frantar and colleagues back in 2022. Today we're going to unpack how it squeezes a model down to 3 or 4 bits and still keeps it sharp. Now, to appreciate what Gptq buys you, let's put the before and after side by side. Ordinary weights sit at full precision, storing every number in 16 bits. They're wonderfully accurate, but they're also enormous, and that size is what forces a big model onto multiple GPUs and drives your memory bill through the roof. For plenty of teams, that alone is the reason they can't afford to run the model they want. Gptq takes those same weights and packs each one into just 3 or 4 bits. Here's the surprising part. The model ends up roughly a quarter of its original size, yet the quality loss is tiny, small enough that most users would never notice it in everyday use. You get the intelligence of the big model at a fraction of the footprint. So how does it actually pull this off without wrecking the model? Look, the whole trick is that Gptq works carefully, one layer at a time. Everything begins with an already trained model. There's no fresh training run and no gradient descent here. Gptq simply takes the finished weights as they are and gets ready to compress them layer by layer. Then, for a given layer, it rounds the weights down to that tiny 3 or 4-bit grid. Rounding always introduces a little error. So this is the moment where a naive method would start bleeding accuracy. Here's the clever bit. Gptq uses approximate second-order information, the Hessian, to understand how each rounding error will ripple through the layer. It then nudges the weights it hasn't quantized yet to cancel out that error and keep the layer's output close to the original. So instead of errors piling up, each one gets absorbed by the weights still waiting their turn. Once every layer has been processed this way, you're left with a fully compressed model. Because the errors were compensated as it went, the finished model behaves almost like the full precision when it came from. All right, let's boil Gptq down to the 3 ideas that really matter. First, it's purely post-training. You pointed at a model that's already finished, and it quantizes in one shot with no retraining, so you avoid the huge cost of another training run entirely. Second, error compensation with second-order information is the secret sauce. By using Hessian curvature to adjust the remaining weights, Gptq keeps the output faithful where a plain rounding pass would simply fall apart at 3 or 4 bits. That correction step is what separates Gptq from naive quantization. Third, the payoff is a dramatic memory cut. A model that once demanded several GPUs can suddenly fit comfortably on one, which makes serving cheaper and puts big models within reach of far more people. Lower hardware requirements are ultimately what makes a technique like this worth the effort. Okay, let's lock into 4 things worth remembering about Gptq. Gptq quantizes a trained model in a single shot after training. It shrinks the weights down to 3 or 4 bits with no retraining at all. Working layer by layer, it uses approximate second-order Hessian information to compensate for the error every rounding step introduces. The result is a model about a quarter the size that still runs with only a tiny drop in quality. Practically, that means a model which once needed several GPUs can now fit on a single card. Want more of these efficiency techniques explained in plain language? You'll find them waiting for you over at Standarity.com.